All right. Would you like to come introduce our speaker?
Yeah. What I like him to
Yeah, you should never.
Good morning, everyone. So it is my pleasure to introduce a colleague and friend, Matthew Marshall from the Redwood Coast Energy Authority. And I think probably most everyone in here has heard of the Redwood Coast Energy Authority, and we're going to learn more about it this morning and some of the great projects they're doing. Unfortunately, without the PowerPoint, which he brought, he will speak and I will do pantomime of the slides and act out the various, yes, exactly. I didn't have my costume for the interpretive dance, but so Matthew is a graduate of Cal Poly, Humboldt, and is been executive director of the RCEA for over 11 years, which doesn't seem that long, but my gosh, yeah, because I remember when he came on. And prior to that, he's with the city of Denver with their greenhouse gas reduction program. And he's very involved in a lot of things. He's president of the California Community Choice Association, and we'll probably hear a little bit about community choice here in a minute. But he's also on the Trinidad Coastal Land Trust, the Redwood Parks Conservancy, the Chamber of Commerce, where he chairs the Business Industry Committee for the city in the city of Eureka. It doesn't say this on your bio, but he is also the proud father of two young kids, Alex and Ian. And he's a bagpipe player. And so, yes, he loves to do that. And he and his wife, Stacy, are the new owners of the Moonstone Beach. So that was not on his bio, but I want to throw all that in. So welcome, come on up, and let me get my costume on.
I'm going to bring my coffee since I don't have to deal with slides or anything. So, thanks, Greg. And yeah, if anyone, my side note, not take my work hat off. If anyone wants to book an event at the Moonstone Beach House, call my wife. So the Redwood Coast Energy Authority is a local government joint powers agency of the county and all of the cities, similar to the Waste Management Authority and the Transit Authority. And so what I was asked to talk about today was just a little bit about who we are, but then offshore wind, which is picking up steam. And so I was just going to cover a little bit about, like, why is that happening here? What's kind of the background, and what's going on, now and next steps. So as far as what we do, we were founded in 2003 with the goal of supporting sustainable energy initiatives for our member governments, which is the city and all the counties, the water district. That's a lot of that's been energy efficiency over the years. We do a lot of work with businesses and retrofitting lighting and things like that. And it's expanded over the years to include electric vehicle charging infrastructure, renewable energy planning. We worked a lot with our member governments on, doing energy planning for general plans and climate action planning. And in 2017, we launched what's called a community choice aggregation or community choice energy program, which gives us local control over the supply part of electricity. So, PG&E still owns and operates all the poles and wires, but we have local control through a local public agency of where that electricity comes from and setting the price for that. So since we launched, we've consistently had slightly lower rates than PG&E. Our board adopted the goal of maximizing the use of local renewable resources to meet our energy needs while maintaining competitive rates with PG&E. And so we've always been able to be a little bit cheaper than PG&E while investing in local programs and local energy development. We built the solar battery storage microgrid at the airport. So RCEA owns and operates that. We did that in partnership, obviously, with the county and Cal Poly Humboldt and PG&E. But as far as kind of owning and operating it, that's a small power plant that we have here. We have a contract with Humboldt Sawmill Company down in Scotia, and then we're looking at adding more solar locally, but also offshore wind. And so the offshore wind piece, the reason why it's not just locally interesting, we've been working on this for since 2017. It was funny because the day that the federal sale notice for the auction, which is going to happen December 6th, came out, my Facebook feed like memory from 5 years ago to the day was like when we first like signed an MOU with an offshore wind company to start like looking at how we could do this in Humboldt County. So it's been about 5 years in the making. Actively, we'd identified it as an opportunity before that. But when we started working on seeing like how can we actually make this happen in Humboldt, and the reason why we saw that opportunity and why developers in the state and the federal government saw that opportunity is because we have like one of the best like wind resources in the entire country. If you look at a map of wind resource off the coast of Northern California, Southern Oregon is literally like the best wind resource in the lower 48 United States. And so it's this sort of world-class, renewable energy opportunity. The thing that's only made it come to, sort of the head in the last 5 years is that the water gets really deep off of California. So most offshore wind you see in Europe and now on the East Coast is fixed bottom, where there's like a foundation like this sitting on the ocean floor. And so to do deep water offshore wind, you need floating foundations, which sounds crazy to put a giant wind turbine on a floating foundation, but it's just using mostly technology that's been developed in oil and gas, over the last decades and decades for deep water, oil exploration and extraction. And so they're basically taking that existing information and saying, well, gosh, let's scale it down. Let's put a wind turbine on it. And, you're going to make adjustments, but there's a lot of technical capabilities for building crazy big things that float out in the ocean and, don't get destroyed in hurricanes and things like that. And so, so that the technology really has been starting to be deployed in Europe. And now there's multiple floating wind projects in Portugal and Scotland. Which, when people say our weather's really bad, it's like, well, the North Sea off of Scotland isn't exactly known for its climate. So it's, we're not the proving ground of this technology. And so, the technology in the last few years really started to get to that commercialization point. We actually issued, because we wanted to see this happen in a way that wasn't negative for the community. Back in 2018, the beginning of 2018, we issued a request for qualification for development partners. And so we said, well, there's this opportunity, the technology is getting there, the wind is there, we've got these local renewable goals. We don't want to see this be sort of a negative, extractive kind of big company comes in, kind of runs roughshod. If they're successful, then it has, unnecessary community impacts, or they're not successful because they didn't do it right. And then we don't get anything. And so we really wanted to have it be sort of more of a community-led process. And so we said, okay, if you're a developer, because we need somebody that's got the billions of dollars and the technical capabilities to pull it off, do you want to partner with the community and really have like a public-private partnership? We got a pretty strong response back then in 2018 and ended up picking a team. We actually submitted because, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management that does federal leasing for offshore wind and everything else in federal waters, so 3+ miles off the coast is BOEM. They hadn't really been up here. They'd started to look at the central coast of California down near Morro Bay, but they have a process where you can say, hey, we got an idea for a lease area. And so we kind of did community engagement for 2018, looked at kind of where it would go, talking with commercial fishermen and environmental groups and, people that are knowledgeable about, ocean wildlife, and sort of identified an area. And then shortly after we submitted that, so we did that in 2018, BOEM slapped what they call a call area sort of on top of our area. And I have a graphic up here that showed like, okay, they sort of took our area and turned it into sort of an official BOEM area to pair with the one that they also identified off of Morro Bay. And that was in the end of 2018. And then we had a big long stall, approximately the duration of a federal administration. And then, really the beginning of last year, this year, things sort of started moving again, and BOEM started going through the environmental permitting process and working with the Coastal Commission and everything that was involved in that. And that culminated in, a few days ago, them issuing the final sale notice for an offshore wind auction that'll take place on December 6th. They took the Humboldt Wind Energy area, which is about 25 miles that way, and carved it into 2 lease areas. So, a developer can only get 1 lease. There's also 3 down off of Morro Bay and the Central Coast. And so on December 6th, they're going to auction off those 5 California wind energy areas. And there's a list of, I think, 40-some developers that are qualified to bid on that. And, they're going to be pressing the auction button to secure one of those leases. The team that we, selected back in 2018 is obviously a contender. They're not guaranteed to get one of those leases, but we hope they do because they've been good partners so far. But even if they get one, there'll be another developer, or maybe it's two different developers that we haven't worked with yet. So we'll see. It's kind of a backwards process, but it's sort of based off of the federal oil and gas leasing process that they transferred to wind. And so it's like people bid and get a lease area before they've even done any sort of permitting or design. And so, I think one of the things that comes up is like, December 7th or whatever it's going to be, there's going to be headlines that say 2 wind developers just bid maybe $100 million, maybe $200 million. We're not sure what the final price will be to secure those lease areas. But it's going to be a big number. I mean, the minimum bid is $6 million. And, one of the, I think, there was a Carolina auction earlier this year off of like North Carolina. And those were, I think, 100 to 200 million to secure the leases in the auction. New York had a big auction, and the highest bid was for one of like, I think they had 5 or 6 areas, was $1 billion to get the lease. So with a B, and so the other ones were like, upper, kind of 800, 900 million. So I forget, like $4 or $5 billion or something they got from that entire auction. I don't think it's going to be quite that aggressive here because of the floating foundation and kind of different factors in the energy markets, but it's going to be a lot of zeros, but that's really just the start of the process. They don't have permission to build anything. That's just really to get them site control, and then there's going to be probably at least 5-year process of environmental studies and permitting. So it's kind of a start line. It's not like the finish line, but there is going to be I think a lot of activity. And one of the things for Humboldt County that, in addition to our wind resource, that's really paired with Humboldt Bay, which has been identified both at the federal and the state level as a prime candidate for becoming like the West Coast hub for offshore wind deployment. So assembly to start, but potentially manufacturing and other activities. Just in the sense that these things are huge. So if you've seen an onshore wind farm, you're like, oh yeah, I've seen them. They're big, right? Well, the offshore ones, because they're not constrained by what you could put on a rail car or a road, because they're going in and out by the ocean. They're like taller than the Golden Gate Bridge. So like they're massive. And so, one example of that is the Terrigen project that didn't happen because of perhaps inadequate community engagement, among other reasons. That was about 130 megawatt project, kind of similar in scale to the PG&E natural gas plant. If you don't think in megawatts. And that was going to be, 60 some turbines. The same size project in an offshore farm would be like 10 turbines. And so, there's fewer, much larger turbines, like I said, as tall as the Golden Gate Bridge. And so when you think about deploying that, the vertical draft is an issue. So if you're taller than the Golden Gate Bridge, you can't go under the Golden Gate Bridge. And they put these together in the harbor and float them out upright on the foundation and then anchor them out, where they're being situated. And so, the fact that there's no vertical draft, there's no bridges or power lines or anything to stop you from getting out of Humboldt Bay. Obviously, we're located at like the best wind resource, and also in the middle of the West Coast. So if things are happening in Oregon, Washington, things are happening in Southern California, we're right in the middle of that. And then, as you all know, there's a lot of underutilized industrial, coastal, dependent, property that's just growing weeds and deteriorating concrete. And so the fact that we have that much space available, that's coastal zoned industrial, that's not being used, really just even years ago when they started doing assessments of like, where did you put offshore wind harbor facilities on the West Coast? It was like Humboldt. So there's going to have to be a lot of investment. So the first thing we're going to really see probably is investment in port infrastructure. The state's already committed millions of dollars to sort of kickstarting that, and that's going to just keep ramping up. Because obviously, if you want to deploy it from here, you got to build the dock first before you start putting the wind turbines together. And that's where we'll see the turbines is going to be, where they're getting put together in Humboldt Bay before they get towed out 25 miles away.
So when they put in the bid, is it based on money or merit?
It's based on money. So, and it's, again, the process is not ideal, and it's really based off of like oil and gas leasing of like, how much money can we make for the federal treasury? Now, that said, they've actually moved the needle quite a bit from the traditional sort of BOEM process. It's moved a couple notches over the last year. So that Carolina auction I mentioned, they actually had what they call multi-factor auction. So it's not just cash going to the federal treasury, which is like, doesn't really help us. And so in the final sale notice, there's actually 30% of like the bid value is for just cash to the federal government. So there's 20% that's focused on investing in workforce development and supply chain. That's one of the things we want to do is make sure that that's domestic. So the BOEM rule says domestic, like United States workforce development supply chain. We really want to try to make sure that's as much as possible Humboldt County local workforce development supply chain, and that's where that long lead time gives us some time to be active in that. And then there's another 5% for having commitment for community benefits agreement for users of to thankfully not sue us, because he said you could do whatever you want with the money. But so they formed this organization so that they could bring all of them together. And then they've got a board that represents each port so that they can kind of have a unified voice. And they've developed sort of a template agreement to say, hey, this is how we want to coexist. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to do, just as far as our part, is like, hey, we want this to not fail, and so we want to make sure that we're helping the developers that are coming from Norway or wherever and are like, okay, how do we work with this community, environmental groups, tribes, and just the broader population. And then down the road, as the entity that's responsible for electricity, we want to be a power off taker. And so that's, the other piece of leverage we have to say, hey, we want to buy the power, we want it to be from a good project, and we want it to be cost effective. We could be sort of an anchor tenant of the first phase, but again, there's going to have to be other off takers. And you actually mentioned the California Community Choice Association, which this year I'm the president of, which is all the other community choice energy providers, which go farther north, one of the smallest, but goes all the way to San Diego, and now going into the Central Valley. So, CCAs collectively are serving like 11 million customers in California. We're like a third of the state energy load. And so, as far as what we're doing is like, well, we'll buy a little bit of it, but we're just a little humble, but we also have really close relationships and actually some joint procurement structures so that we can facilitate, the power offtake with those other, local government power providers across the state, like LA County and Alameda County and Silicon Valley, that are a lot bigger than us. Here's a question.
When would you estimate, what did you count? All of this will be completed, so this public can start using that.
Yeah, so the hope is, and the permitting process will be, whatever it takes. But the short answer is 2030 is when I think it's feasible for there to be that first phase of, maybe 10 turbines that don't require transmission upgrades to be actually like out in the water producing power if everything goes well. And that aligns with what the state targets sort of assumed was like, oh, we could probably have a little bit happening in Humboldt then. The transmission upgrades are likely going to take longer than that. And so that's where I think to see more than those first 10, which again, that's big for Humboldt County. That's like a Humboldt County sized project, but the state sized phase, I think would be more in the 2045 range. So my bet, I got a little money riding on this is wind turbines, at least moving out into the ocean by 2030. So.
Then last question.
Well, I just want to give a pat on the back to Matthew and the RCEA, who, traditionally in projects, big project comes, we learn about it kind of mid-phase or towards the end of it, and then people come out and, there's a lot of community dissension sometimes and opposition. And so they were really smart. You talked about bringing the group together to look at the partnership and all, and that was a community-led effort, really diverse group. And I think that was really helpful. And then the Core Hub brought, gosh, I don't remember, 45 or so different stakeholders to do a big ask for what we wanted to see in the sale notice. And I think that really affected it too. Didn't get everything we wanted, but we didn't expect so. So it's nice to have all that front loaded. It's a great way to try to work on getting community ideas within a big project, so we don't have a lot of the opposition at the end. And I think we learned a lot from Darien, this Darien process. So anyway, pat on the back to Matthew for there. Leading all
Thank you
that.
very much for your.
Thanks for having me.